Daniel Carter grabbed the wheelchair before it hit the pavement. Pure instinct, no hesitation, no thought. The woman gasped. He steadied her with both hands, heart slamming against his ribs, and looked down into the most startled pair of green eyes he had ever seen. "I've got you," he said. "You're okay." She wasn't a stranger in distress. She was his blind date. And she had been watching him the entire time. What happens next will make you question everything you think you know about second chances, and why the most important test of a man's character never comes when he's ready for it. Drop your city in the comments right now. Let's see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. The tie was already strangling him. Daniel Carter stood in front of the bathroom mirror in his apartment on Clover Street, tugging at the knot for the fourth time in 10 minutes, and he still couldn't get it right. Not because he didn't know how to tie a tie. He'd worn one to every parent-teacher conference, every IEP meeting, every moment in the last 5 years when he needed the world to take him seriously as a man doing this alone. He knew how to tie a tie. He just didn't know why he was doing this tonight.
"Dad, you look weird."
Emma was standing in the bathroom doorway, 7 years old, wearing her favorite yellow pajamas with the tiny ducks on them, holding her stuffed rabbit, the one she'd named Gerald, against her chest, the way she always did when something felt off to her. She had a gift for sensing tension. Always had, even when she couldn't name what she was feeling. "Thanks, Bug," Daniel said, finally loosening the knot. "That's exactly the confidence boost I needed." "Why are you dressed like that?" "I'm going to dinner." "With who?" He hesitated. "A friend." Emma stared at him. She had her mother's eyes, that pale, almost silver gray, that seemed to look straight through whatever you were saying to find what you meant underneath. "What friend?" "You don't know her." "Her?" "Go watch your show, Em." "Is it a date?" Daniel turned from the mirror and crouched down to her level. Up close, he could see the slight furrow in her brow, the way she was squeezing Gerald a little tighter. She wasn't upset, not exactly. She was processing. That was the thing people who didn't know Emma always got wrong. They saw the silence or the stillness and assumed she wasn't engaged. Emma was always engaged. She was just thorough about it. "It's dinner," he said carefully, "with someone Kevin thinks I should meet." "Kevin's girlfriend picks bad movies," Emma said. "That has nothing to do with she picked the one with the loud dragon. It hurt my ears." "Emma, if Kevin picked her, maybe Kevin has bad judgment." Daniel pressed his lips together to keep from smiling. "Kevin is watching you tonight, so be nice." "I'm always nice." "You told him his beard looked like a wet dog last time." "It did." He put his hands on her small shoulders. "Hey, look at me." She met his eyes. She was good at that, better than a lot of people gave her credit for. "I'll be home before 10. Gerald will protect you, and Kevin will make the popcorn the right way if you remind him about the salt." "2 shakes, not 3, Emma said seriously. "Exactly. 2 shakes." He kissed her forehead and stood up. In the hallway mirror, he caught one last look at himself. 42 years old, a little more gray at the temples than he remembered, a tie that was still slightly crooked, and eyes that hadn't fully rested in about 5 years. He looked like a man who was trying. He supposed that was something. Kevin was already on the couch with the remote when Daniel grabbed his keys. "You look good, man," Kevin said, not looking up. "Emma says I look weird." "You look good weird. It works." Kevin finally glanced over and pointed. "Straighten the tie." "I know." "Her name's Sophie. She's—" "Kevin. Really something. Seriously, Danny, I think—" "Kevin." Daniel stopped at the door. "If this is a disaster, I'm blaming you for the rest of our natural lives." Kevin grinned. "If this is a disaster, I'll let you." Marchetti's was the kind of restaurant that made Daniel feel like he'd wandered into someone else's life. It wasn't that it was pretentious, exactly. It was just that it was the kind of place where people came when they had something to celebrate, or something to prove, or both. White tablecloths, candles, a host at the door who looked at you like he was doing you a favor by letting you in. The parking lot alone had 4 cars worth more than Daniel's monthly take-home. And as he walked across the pavement in his best shoes, the black ones he saved for occasions, though he couldn't remember the last occasion, he told himself to relax. Just dinner, just a person, just one night. He was almost to the entrance when he saw her. She was at the top of the access ramp on the side of the building, a long, steep incline that ran along the brick wall up to the main door. She was in a wheelchair, and she was alone, and the chair was moving. Not in a controlled way, in the way things move when they aren't supposed to. The front wheels had caught the edge of a cracked section of the ramp, and the chair was tilting. Not dramatically, not yet, but enough. He could see her hands gripping the wheels, trying to correct, and the correction was making it worse. The angle of the ramp was working against her. In another 2 seconds, maybe 3, the chair was going to go sideways, and she was going to go with it. And there was nobody else on that side of the building. Daniel was already running before he finished the thought. He covered the distance in about 6 strides, got both hands on the back of the chair frame just as it lurched, and pulled. Not hard, just firm. A controlled drag back and to the right, evening out the wheels, getting them back on the flat part of the ramp surface. The chair steadied. He held on for a second longer to be sure, then exhaled. His heart was going like a freight train. "I've got you," he said, because it was the only thing that came out. "You're okay." She turned her head and looked up at him. Green eyes, dark hair pulled back, but coming loose at the temples. A dark green dress that matched those eyes almost exactly. For just a moment, just one, she looked completely unguarded. Startled and real, and something else he couldn't name. Then the composure came back, quietly and quickly, like a curtain being drawn. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was steadier than his. "Are you—" He caught himself. "Sorry, that was the ramp, just the crack in the surface, right there." He gestured, aware he was rambling. "You hit it at the wrong angle, and it—" "I know," she said. "I noticed it too late. I can help you the rest of the way if I can manage from here." Not rude, just clear. "But thank you, genuinely." He nodded, stepped back, and watched for just a moment to make sure she had control. She did, completely, moving up the rest of the ramp with practiced ease. And then he walked around to the main entrance, took a breath, and told his heart to slow down. He gave his name at the host's stand. The host checked something and smiled with professional warmth. "Right this way, Mr. Carter. Your table is ready. Your guest will be joining you shortly." Daniel followed him through the restaurant, past the candles and the white tablecloths and the low murmur of conversations he wasn't part of, and sat down at a table near the window. He straightened the fork for no reason. He unfolded and refolded the napkin. He thought about Emma's face in the doorway, holding Gerald. He thought about the last 5 years. The casseroles Kevin's wife had brought over when Lisa left. The IEP meetings where he'd sat across from teachers and therapists and advocates and learned a whole new language just to fight for his daughter. The nights Emma couldn't sleep, and he'd sat on the floor of her room with his back against her bed, reading the same 3 chapters of the same book over and over until her breathing finally evened out. The mornings he'd gotten up before 5 to make sure the routine was perfect. Same breakfast, same sequence, same gentle countdown to getting in the car. Because one disrupted morning could send shockwaves through her entire day, and she'd already had enough disruption for a lifetime. He thought about Lisa saying, "I can't do this." Daniel, with her bags already packed, like she'd been preparing the sentence for months. He thought about how he'd nodded, because fighting it would have meant asking her to stay for the wrong reasons. And he thought about Kevin sitting across from him at this very kind of restaurant 3 weeks ago, pushing a glass of water in his direction and saying, "You're not a monk, Danny. You're allowed to want something for yourself." He was still deciding whether Kevin was right when he heard the host's voice near the entrance and looked up. She was moving through the restaurant toward him, and as she came through the candlelight and the space opened up between them, and there were no more tablecloths or strangers to obscure his view, he felt the recognition land in his chest like something falling. The green dress, the dark hair, the eyes that had looked up at him on the ramp. She wasn't just his blind date. She was the woman he'd caught. She stopped at the table. He stood, because that's what his father had taught him, and some things were just automatic. "Daniel," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," he managed. Yes, I'm Daniel." He pulled himself together. "Sophie?" "Sophie Navarro." She extended her hand and he shook it, and it was warm and firm and completely real. "Apparently we've already met." He sat back down because his legs weren't entirely sure what they were doing. He stopped. "You were on the ramp." "I was." "You're my—" "Kevin set this up. Your blind date." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile yet. Something cautious. "Yes." He stared at her for a second. "Did you know? Before, when I was helping you, did you know who I was?" She held his gaze. "I knew your name. Kevin described you. But I didn't know for certain until you told the host." "So when you said thank you—" "I meant it. No hesitation. Whatever else you're about to ask, I meant that part." The waiter appeared, introduced himself, recited something about specials that Daniel didn't hear a single word of, and disappeared. The candle between them threw soft shadows. Outside the window, the parking lot lights were starting to come on in the early dark. "I want to ask you something," Daniel said. "Okay. And I want you to tell me the truth, even if the answer is something I might not love." Sophie folded her hands on the table and waited. Was that a test? She didn't answer immediately. She picked up her water glass, took a small sip, set it back down. And then she looked at him straight, the way very few people looked at you straight anymore. "Yes," she said. He felt something tighten in his jaw. Not anger exactly. Closer to— he wasn't sure. Closer to being seen before he was ready. "The crack in the ramp is real. I'm not reckless with my own safety." She kept her voice level. "But I knew about it. I'd looked at the approach before I got out of my car. I knew where the problem section was. I also knew that if I timed my arrival carefully, I'd reach it right as you were crossing the parking lot. Kevin told you when I was arriving." "Kevin is very helpful," she said, and something in her tone suggested this was not entirely a compliment. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. The restaurant hummed and glittered around them, perfectly indifferent. "Why?" he finally asked. "Because I needed to know something about you before we got to this part." This part being sitting across from me. She said it simply, without drama, but it landed with weight. "Men react in different ways when they find out I use a wheelchair, Daniel. Some of them are very kind about it, in a way that's also the end of everything. They decide before the appetizer arrives that I'm not what they had in mind, and the rest of the evening is just courtesy. Some of them try very hard not to look at the chair, which is somehow worse than staring. Some of them get protective in a way that stops being about me pretty quickly and starts being about how they feel about themselves. She paused. I needed to see what you did when there was no script, when there was no time to think about what the right move was, when it was just someone in trouble right in front of you. And if I'd walked past? You didn't. But if I had, she considered it. Then we'd have had a pleasant enough dinner, and Kevin would have spent the next 2 weeks feeling guilty, and that would have been the end of it. Daniel leaned back in his chair. He looked at the candle for a moment. Then he looked back at her. I'm not going to pretend I'm not a little... The word is not angry, but I'm looking for something in that direction. That's fair, Sophie said. I don't love being tested. Most people don't, she agreed. I don't love being a checkbox on someone's list of things they found out about me before the food arrived. I figure we're even. Something about that, the flatness of it, the complete absence of self-pity, caught him off guard. He'd been ready, somewhere in the back of his mind, for an apology or defense, or at least an explanation offered with some kind of softness. Instead, she had just said we're even, like she meant it, like it was the most reasonable conclusion available. He found himself almost smiling. Kevin really didn't tell me anything, Daniel said. About you, about any of it. I know. I asked him not to. He told me your name and that you were, quote, really something. Sophie made a face. That's alarming. It is a little. What did you picture? Honestly? He considered. I was mostly just trying to get out the door without my daughter grilling me too hard. Sophie's expression shifted slightly. A small, careful movement, like a door opening 1 inch. You have a daughter? Emma. She's 7. Kevin mentioned you had a kid. He didn't tell me her name. A beat. What's she like? And there it was. The question that sorted everything. Always. What's she like? Because the answer wasn't simple, had never been simple, and the way he answered it, and the way the other person received the answer, told him everything he needed to know about whether the rest of the conversation was worth having. He looked at Sophie. She's extraordinary, he said. She's also autistic. And before you, I'm not saying that as a disclaimer or a warning. I'm just saying it because it's part of who she is. And who she is the most important thing in my life. So, he stopped. Sophie hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't rearranged her expression into the particular shape of, "Oh, I'm so sorry," that he'd learned to dread. Not because it wasn't kind, but because it always meant the person was already framing Emma as a problem to be acknowledged, rather than a person to be known. What does she love? Sophie asked. He blinked. What? Emma, what does she love? He paused, caught off guard by how simple it was. She loves rabbits, stuffed rabbits especially. She has one named Gerald, who is essentially a member of the family. She loves when I read to her, the same books over and over. She loves the sound of rain. She loves this one particular kind of strawberry yogurt that they only sell at one specific grocery store, and if they're out of it, the whole morning is different. He stopped again. He hadn't talked about Emma like this, just openly, without bracing for the response, in longer than he could remember. She's funny. She has this completely deadpan delivery that catches you off guard every time. Like what? She told Kevin his beard looked like a wet dog tonight. Sophie laughed. A real one, quick and surprised, and it changed her whole face. Was she wrong? Kevin's had a rough beard year. Honestly, no. She was still smiling when she picked up the menu, and he picked up his, and somewhere in the space of the last 4 minutes, the strangling feeling the tie had been giving him all evening had simply stopped. The waiter came back. They ordered. Daniel the salmon, Sophie the risotto. Both of them water for now, thank you. When the waiter was gone again, Sophie set down her menu and said, "Can I tell you how I ended up in the chair?" "You don't have to." "I want to." She said it the same way she said most things, like she'd already decided and was just informing him of the decision. 3 years ago, I was driving home from school. I'm a teacher, special education, 3rd through 5th grade. And it was late because I'd stayed to finish building a sensory station for one of my students who was having a hard time regulating. I was tired. Honestly, I was not as focused as I should have been. She said it without softening it, without looking away. A truck ran a red light. I didn't see it until I was already in the middle of the intersection. The impact was on my driver's side door. She paused, not for effect, just measuring. I was in the hospital for 6 weeks. I had 3 surgeries. I was told I would probably not walk again. And after about 2 months of very determined and absolutely exhausting effort, I decided that probably was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and I was going to find out for myself.
Did you? Daniel asked quietly.
I can stand, for short periods, with support. I can take a few steps. Her voice was matter-of-fact. It's not what most people picture when they say walking again. The chair is permanent. I've made my peace with that. She looked at him. The thing I never made peace with is what happened to the sensory station. My sub took it down because it was cluttering the room. My student had a really hard month. He felt the particular weight of that, the specific grief of something built carefully for someone who needed it, being dismantled by someone who didn't understand the point. He recognized it. It was adjacent to the feeling he got in IEP meetings when someone used the word disruptive about Emma, like it was a judgment instead of a description. "What's your student's name?" he asked. Sophie looked at him for just a moment. "Marcus." "How's he doing now?" "Better," she said. "His 4th grade teacher is good. She listens." A pause. "Not all of them do." "No," Daniel agreed. "They don't." The food arrived. The candle burned lower. Outside, the parking lot lights were fully on now, the sky beyond them deep blue going to black. And inside Marchetti's, the pleasant hum of other people's evenings went on around them, unaware and unconcerned. "Can I ask you something now?" Sophie said, near the midpoint of the meal. "Sure." "What happened?" "With Emma's mom." He set down his fork. Not defensively. He'd known this was coming, in the same way you know a particular stretch of road is coming even before you can see it. "She left," he said. "Emma was 2 when Lisa got the diagnosis. She was 4 when Lisa packed her things. In between there was a lot. A lot of fear, a lot of grief, a lot of conversations that went in circles." He looked at the table. "I don't think Lisa is a bad person. I think she got to a place where she genuinely couldn't see a version of the future that was okay. And instead of fighting through that, she left. That must have been the hardest thing I've ever been through," he said. "And not because she left me. I could survive that. Because Emma was going to wake up one day and figure out that her mother chose to not be there. And I don't have a way to fix that for her. I just have to be there, so that when she figures it out, she doesn't feel alone in it." Sophie had stopped eating. She was just watching him. "Kevin thinks I've been in survival mode for 5 years, Daniel said. He's probably right. Is that why you didn't want to come tonight?" "I didn't say I didn't want to come. Kevin told me you said no 4 times before you said yes." "Kevin," Daniel said with measured feeling, "shares a great deal of information. He cares about you." "I know he does." Daniel picked up his fork again, looked at it, set it back down. "I didn't want to come because I've gotten very good at a specific kind of life. Emma and work and the routine. And that life works. It's not... Nobody would write a song about it, but it works. And anytime you bring something new in, there's the possibility that it disrupts what works. And the cost of disruption isn't just mine. Sophie nodded slowly. Emma. So you've been protecting the routine?
Something like that. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I understand that. I do. She turned her water glass slowly in her fingers. After the accident, I built a version of that. Everything very precise, very managed. Because when you've had a thing happen to you that you had no control over whatsoever, control starts to feel like oxygen. You'll give up a lot of other things to hold on to it.
When did you start coming up for air? Daniel asked. She looked at him.
I'm still working on it, she said honestly. But tonight is part of the process.
He held her gaze. For what it's worth, he said, I'm glad I caught you. And for the first time since she'd come through the doors of Marchetti's, Sophie Navarro let herself smile, without any reservation in it at all. The salmon was good. Daniel noticed this in the peripheral way you notice small things when most of your attention is somewhere else entirely. The way you're aware of the weather while you're having a conversation that actually matters. He ate. She ate. The restaurant moved around them in its own quiet rhythm. And then Sophie said, "Tell me about your work." And the way she said it, genuinely, without the particular lift in the voice that people use when they're just filling space, made him feel like someone had opened a window he'd forgotten was there. I'm an architect, Daniel said. Residential mostly. Custom homes, some renovations. I work for a small firm, Haverford and Associates. 4 of us total. It's not glamorous.
Do you like it?
I love it, he said, and then looked slightly surprised at himself for saying it that quickly and that clearly. I love when something I draw on paper becomes a place where people actually live their lives, where kids grow up, where people have dinners, like this. He paused. That sounds a little... It doesn't, Sophie said. It sounds like someone who still cares about what they do. She tilted her head. Do you design with accessibility in mind? He set down his fork.
More than I used to. What changed? He was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable kind of quiet. More the kind where someone is actually deciding how honest to be. After the divorce. After I'd spent enough time navigating the world as someone who needed it to accommodate people, I started noticing how many buildings don't think about that. Schools, mostly. Emma's school has a sensory room, which is great, but the entrance is a nightmare on a bad weather day. The lights flicker when it's raining because the electrical is old, and for some of my daughter's classmates, that's not just inconvenient, it's a genuine crisis. He looked at his hands. I brought it up at a board meeting once. They thanked me for my input. Sophie made a small sound. They always thank you for your input. Right before they table it indefinitely. I once wrote a 14-page proposal for sensory-friendly classroom modifications, Sophie said, with citations, charts, a cost breakdown. What happened? My principal said it was very thorough and asked if I'd considered joining the Parent Advisory Committee. He did not even, she confirmed. Daniel laughed, a real one, shorter and more surprised than he'd intended. Sophie smiled into her water glass. Somewhere across the restaurant, someone was having a birthday. A small knot of people broke into a quiet, slightly off-key rendition of the song, and for a few seconds, both of them just listened to it without saying anything, which was its own kind of comfortable. Can I tell you something without it sounding like I'm making assumptions? Daniel said after the singing stopped. You can try. You're not what I expected tonight. Sophie raised an eyebrow. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone... He searched for it. I've been out of this long enough that I think I'd built up some version of it in my head. First date. The version where everyone's performing slightly, where you're both showing the best angle, and hoping the other person doesn't notice the parts you're keeping turned away. And this isn't that? You told me you staged a wheelchair incident to screen my character within the first 5 minutes, Daniel said.
That is not performing the best angle. No, Sophie admitted. I suppose it isn't. She looked at him steadily. I don't have patience for the performance anymore. I used to. After the accident, the first year, I tried very hard to present a version of my life that made people comfortable, that showed them I was fine, I was managing. Nothing had fundamentally changed, because I could see what it did to people when I wasn't fine. The way they didn't know where to look.
What made you stop? My friend Claudia, she said. She has exactly zero tolerance for nonsense. And about 8 months after the accident, she sat down across from me in my kitchen and said, Sophie, you are exhausting yourself performing okayness for people who are not worth the performance. And I was so tired by that point that I just stopped arguing. Claudia sounds like someone I'd like. Claudia would like you, Sophie said. She told me, before tonight, that I needed to give whoever showed up a real chance. Not the trial by ramp chance. She paused. The actual kind. And are you? She looked at him squarely. I'm here, aren't I? The waiter came and cleared their plates with the smooth efficiency of someone who was very good at not interrupting. When he was gone, Sophie folded her hands on the table and said, Tell me something real. Something you haven't told anyone in a while. Daniel looked at her. That's a significant ask for a first date. I know. We just established that most first dates involve strategic angle presentation. We also established that I'm done with that. He was quiet for a moment. The candle had burned down further. The light was lower and warmer, and the restaurant had thinned out just enough that their table felt slightly more private than it had an hour ago. 3 months ago, he said slowly, Emma had a really bad week. I don't mean a hard day. I mean a week where every morning was a battle, and every afternoon was recovery, and every night I was sitting on the floor of her room thinking I was getting it wrong in some way I couldn't identify. She wasn't sleeping. She was upset about something at school and couldn't tell me what, and I was running through every possibility, every adjustment, every conversation with her teacher, trying to find the thing I'd missed. He stopped. On the 5th night, she finally told me. A kid in her class had told her that she talked wrong, that her voice was weird. Sophie said nothing. She just waited. And I sat there on the floor next to her bed, and I thought, of all the enormous things I've been preparing myself to help her through, somehow this one got me. A 7-year-old saying her voice was weird. He looked at the candle. I held it together for her, told her that her voice was one of my favorite sounds in the world, that she didn't talk wrong, that whoever said that was just wrong about a lot of things, and would probably figure that out eventually. And then I went to my room, closed the door, and fell apart for about 20 minutes. He said it simply, without apology. I don't tell people that, because the version of the single dad I'm supposed to be is the one who has it together, who's strong, who doesn't. He stopped. But that's the truth of it. Some nights I fall apart for 20 minutes, and then I put myself back together, and then I go make breakfast. Sophie looked at him for a long moment without speaking, and he had the strange, slightly unnerving experience of not being able to fully read her expression. Not because it was closed, but because it had several things happening in it at once. That kid, she said finally, who told Emma her voice was weird. What happened? I called the school, talked to the teacher. The kid apologized, apparently. Emma accepted it? Emma told me the apology was accurate but delivered with poor eye contact. Sophie laughed again, that same quick, genuine laugh that changed her face. She sounds incredible. She is, Daniel said. She genuinely is. I work with kids like Emma every day,
Sophie said, and she said it carefully, like she was aware of the weight of the comparison.
And I want you to know, not as a teacher, just as a person sitting across from you, that what you just described, staying present for her, being the stable thing she returns to, that's not nothing. That's actually the most important thing. The research backs it up, but I don't even need the research. I see it every year. The kids who have one person who just refuses to let them feel alone, they're different, in the best way. Daniel looked down at the table. When he looked back up, something in his expression had shifted. Not broken, not sentimental, just moved. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for saying that. I meant it." "I know you did. That's why." A silence settled between them, but it was the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Daniel picked up his coffee cup. The waiter had brought coffee at some point. He'd been only partly aware of it. And Sophie turned her water glass in her hands again. That small, repeated motion he was beginning to recognize as something she did when she was thinking. "Can I ask about the accident?" he said. "More specifically, I mean. Only if you want." "What do you want to know?" "What the first morning was like," he said, "when you understood what had happened." She took a slow breath. "I woke up and the first thing I noticed was the ceiling. Hospital ceilings have a particular quality, the light, the texture, and I remember thinking very clearly, okay, just okay. Like I was acknowledging something without having processed it yet." She paused. "Then I tried to move my legs, and nothing happened. And the okay became something different." She said it without flinching, and he understood, from years of practicing the same thing in different circumstances, that this wasn't the absence of feeling. It was the trained steadiness of someone who had felt it so many times that they had learned to carry it differently. "My mother was there," Sophie continued. "She'd driven through the night from Phoenix. She was asleep in the chair by the window when I woke up, and I remember being very careful not to wake her, because I knew that the moment she woke up, everything would become real in the way that other people's faces make things real. And I wanted a few more minutes of just the ceiling and the okay." "Did you call anyone? Tell anyone yourself?" "My friend Claudia. She was the first person I told, because Claudia doesn't do the face." Sophie made a small gesture. "The face people make when they don't know how to hold what you just told them." Claudia said, "Okay, what do you need?" And I said, "I don't know yet." And she said, "Fine, I'll be there in 2 hours." That was it. "No face," Daniel said. "No face." Sophie looked at him. "You don't do the face either." "What face am I doing?" "Just listening." She said it like it was more significant than it should have been. "A lot of people, when I tell them about the accident, their face gets very busy. Lots of effort to show me the right amount of sympathy. It's kind, but it pulls you out of the story because suddenly you're managing their reaction. You shouldn't have to manage anyone's reaction to your own life." "No," she said, "you really shouldn't." A pause. "But you do. You just do." "I know," Daniel said. "I've spent 5 years managing people's reactions to Emma. Every new teacher, every parent at the school who doesn't understand why she doesn't engage with their kid the way they expect. Every person in a waiting room who looks at her during a hard moment like she's a disruption in their afternoon." His jaw tightened slightly. "You get very good at the preemptive explanation, the framing, saying the right thing in the right order so that people lead with curiosity instead of pity or judgment. Exhausting. Incredibly. And yet here you are," Sophie said, "sitting across from a stranger, not framing anything." He thought about it. "You didn't give me the chance. You came in too fast with the truth." "That was deliberate," she said. "The ramp wasn't the only test, Daniel." He looked at her. "Everything since we sat down," she said evenly,
has been me being exactly as honest as I know how to be, and watching to see if that made you want to manage me, to soften things, or redirect, or find some comfortable lane we could both drive in without any risk.
Is that what most men do?
Most people do, she said. It's not a gender thing.
It's a safety thing. Honesty is uncomfortable. People want to get to the part where everything is fine. Nothing's fine, Daniel said simply. Or not nothing. But the fine parts are built on top of the parts that aren't. And I think I stopped pretending otherwise somewhere around year 2 of doing this alone. He looked at her. Is that what you wanted to hear? I didn't want to hear anything in particular, Sophie said. I just wanted to hear what was true. He nodded slowly. Outside the window, a couple was walking across the parking lot, laughing about something, their breath making small clouds in the October air. He watched them for just a second, then looked back at Sophie. What does your day look like? He asked. A regular day, she blinked at the shift. You want to know my daily routine? I want to know what your life actually looks like, not the narrative version, just the real one. Okay, she settled into it. I'm up at 5:30. I do 30 minutes of physical therapy before anything else. It's non-negotiable. If I skip it, I feel it by noon. Coffee. I grade papers while it's quiet. I'm at school by 7:15. I have a homeroom and then 3 separate intervention groups throughout the day, plus whatever crises decide to show up unannounced. A slight smile. There are always crises. What kind? A meltdown in the hallway because the lunch menu changed and nobody told Marcus in advance. A new student whose previous school gave him a label that doesn't fit, and now he's trying to be that label because it's the only one he's been given. A parent who wants to know why I'm not pushing harder on grade-level reading when her son is 8 years old and has only been communicating verbally for 18 months. She paused. Regular Tuesday. And you... Daniel stopped. You go back the next day. Every day, she said. Even after, the accident didn't change what I do. It changed how I get there. She said it simply. I was in that room finishing a sensory station when the truck ran the light. That's not a reason to stop building sensory stations. If anything, it's the opposite. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. I want to say something, and I want you to know I'm not being... Just say it. You're remarkable, he said quietly. And I don't mean that in the way it sometimes sounds. I mean... I can see the cost of it, the deliberateness of it, and I think it takes something most people don't have. Sophie looked at the table for a moment. When she looked back up, something had shifted in her eyes. A slight unguardedness, small and quick, like a fish rising to the surface and going back down. I've been told I'm remarkable before, she said. It usually means someone has decided I've transcended my situation. Like the chair is a thing I'm bravely rising above. And I don't... She stopped. That's not what I am. I'm not brave for going to work. I'm a person who loves her job and hates having a substitute. That's not what I meant. I know, she said, which is why I told you what I usually don't explain. She held his gaze. You meant the deliberate honesty part. The refusing to manage other people's reactions. Yes. Claudia keeps telling me it's going to alienate people. Does it? Regularly, Sophie said. But the ones it doesn't alienate turn out to be worth the trouble. A pause. Jury's still out on you, but the early returns are promising. He smiled, and this time he didn't try to make it smaller than it was. The waiter came back and asked if they'd like dessert, and they looked at each other with a slightly conspiratorial expression of two people who have both been paying enough attention to this meal that they'd briefly forgotten about food. Dessert menu,
Sophie said.
Absolutely, Daniel agreed. The waiter left. Daniel turned his coffee cup in his hands. Kevin told you I said no 4 times, he said. How many times did you say no? Sophie considered. 3. What changed your mind? He told me you once drove 40 minutes in the rain to bring one of Emma's classmates a birthday cake because the kid's mom had a family emergency and was going to miss his party. She looked at him. That specific detail. Not, he's a great guy. That specific thing. Daniel looked faintly embarrassed. Kevin needs to develop some discretion. Kevin is a strategic deployer of information, Sophie said. That story was placed deliberately, and it worked. It was just a cake. It was a 40-minute drive in the rain for a child you had no formal obligation to. She tilted her head. For someone whose mother had also, in a way, not shown up. The sentence arrived quietly and sat down at the table between them with all of its weight. Daniel was still for a moment. I didn't think about it that way. I know you didn't, Sophie said. That's the part that convinced me. The dessert menu arrived. They both ordered the chocolate torte, not because they discussed it or decided together, just because they both pointed to the same line at the same moment, which caused a brief collision of fingers on the laminated menu and a startled look from both of them. And then Sophie pulled her hand back, and they looked at each other with the specific awkwardness of 2 people who have just surprised themselves. Chocolate torte, Daniel said seriously. Obviously, Sophie said, equally seriously. And then they were both laughing, a little more than the moment required, and it felt like something releasing, some last residual held-breath tension from the beginning of the evening, finally letting go. It was while they were finishing the torte that Sophie said, "Tell me what you're afraid of." Tonight or in general? In general. He thought about it honestly, which was different from answering quickly. That Emma will grow up and be angry at me for the things I couldn't protect her from. The kid who said her voice was weird is the beginning of something, not the end of it. There's so much more of that ahead of her, and I can't be in every room. I can build the routine, I can fight the school board, I can drive 40 minutes in the rain for a birthday cake, but I can't follow her into every moment of her life and make the world gentler than it is. No, Sophie said. You can't. Does that get easier, knowing that? Ask me in 10 years, she said. I'm still working on the version of it that applies to my own life. She turned the water glass again. My version is, I'm afraid that I've spent 3 years making myself very self-sufficient and very deliberate and very tested, and that maybe what I've actually done is built a very elegant wall and told myself it was architecture. Daniel was quiet. Claudia says I keep people at exactly the right distance to feel connected without being vulnerable, Sophie continued. She says the ramp test is not screening for good men. It's screening for the perfect excuse to stay behind glass. Is she right? Probably, Sophie said. She's irritatingly right about most things. She looked at Daniel. Which is part of why I agreed to tonight. And part of why I'm telling you that. Which is something I've never told anyone I've had dinner with. The wall theory. The wall theory. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, and looked at her directly. Can I say something that might be overstepping? You've been remarkably willing to overstep all evening. I've appreciated it. The ramp. He paused, chose his words. What you did on the ramp. The test. I think it was both things at once. I think it was real screening because you've been hurt before and you're careful. And I also think Claudia is onto something about the glass. But I don't think those 2 things cancel each other out. I think they can both be true. Sophie looked at him steadily. I don't think you need to choose between protecting yourself and being real, he said. I think you haven't met many people who could handle both at the same time. A long beat.
That might be the most perceptive thing anyone said to me in 3 years, she said.
Or you've been eating dinner with the wrong people. Almost certainly both, he smiled. She smiled. The torch was gone. The candle had burned nearly all the way down. The restaurant had thinned to the last quarter of its evening crowd, and the lighting had shifted to something even softer, the way restaurants lean in as the night gets later. Daniel looked at his watch and felt a small, specific drop in his chest. It's almost 9:30. You told Emma you'd be home before 10. I told Emma I'd be home before 10. Neither of them moved for a moment.
I had a very good time, Sophie said. I want to say that clearly, before we do the part where we get the check and look at our phones and it gets slightly awkward. It doesn't have to get awkward. It usually does. I had a very good time too, Daniel said. I want to say that clearly also.
She looked at him, and he looked at her, and the particular quality of that look was the kind that doesn't fully resolve. It just holds itself open, which is sometimes its own kind of answer. I'd like to do this again, he said. Yes, she said. Just that. Not, that sounds great, or I'd like that too, with the lifted, polite intonation of someone managing the exit. Just, yes, flat and real, like she meant it and wasn't going to dress it up. Can I give you my number? He asked.
I got it from Kevin 3 days ago, Sophie said. Of course you did. I didn't call because I was deciding whether tonight was a good idea. And now? She reached across the table and took the pen from the small leather check holder the waiter had left. He'd signed and been charged already. She'd insisted on splitting before he could argue. And she wrote something on the back of the receipt and slid it across to him. He looked at it. It was her number. Just that. Now I'm deciding that it was, she said. He folded the receipt and put it in his jacket pocket. He stood. She moved her chair back from the table with the practiced ease of someone who has done this in 1,000 different spaces and learned where all the geometry is. He walked beside her through the restaurant. Not behind, not hovering, just beside. And the host held the main door open for both of them. And they came out into the October night together. And both of them stopped for a second at the cold of it, the unexpected sharpness. Where are you parked? Daniel asked. West lot, the accessible spaces. I'll walk with you. She looked at him. You don't have to. I know. She held his gaze for a moment, and then nodded. Just once. They walked across the parking lot, side by side, through the pools of light and the spaces between them, and neither of them said anything for the first minute. And the silence was the easiest thing about the entire evening. I want to ask you something, Sophie said, when they were close to her car. Sure. Is it too much if I asked to meet Emma sometime? Not on a date, not as a thing, just... She stopped. I work with kids like her every day, and I know that's not the same thing. I know she's not a category. I'm asking because she sounds like someone I've actually liked to know. Daniel stopped walking. Sophie looked at him, uncertain for the first time all evening. That was too much. No, he said. It wasn't. He looked at her. It was the right amount. It was exactly the right amount. And the way he said it, not like a courtesy, not like something managed into the proper shape, but like something that had simply come out true, was enough. He drove home with the receipt in his jacket pocket and the radio off. That was the thing he noticed first, that he didn't reach for the radio, which was something he always did in the car, filling the silence the way you fill a room you're not sure what to do with. Tonight, he didn't want to fill it. He wanted to sit inside the quiet and let the evening be what it was without talking over it. Sophie Navarro, special education teacher, 3 years in a wheelchair, 14-page proposal rejected by her principal who didn't get it. A friend named Claudia, who deployed truth like a utility. Green eyes, and a dark green dress, and a laugh that came out quick and real and changed her whole face when it arrived.
A woman who had staged a test on a restaurant ramp and then, over the course of 2 hours and 1 chocolate torte, had quietly dismantled every wall she'd built around herself and let him see exactly what was behind it. He thought about what she'd said. Claudia keeps telling me I've built a very elegant wall, and told myself it was architecture. He thought about how she'd said it without shame, just with the kind of clear-eyed accounting you do when you've looked at something long enough to see it accurately. He thought about Emma's face in the doorway, holding Gerald. He pulled onto Clover Street at 9:47. Kevin was on the couch with the TV muted when Daniel came through the door, which meant Kevin had been waiting and had muted it to look like he hadn't been waiting. "You're back," Kevin said, with enormous neutrality.
"I live here, Kevin." "How was it?" Daniel hung up his jacket, carefully, the receipt still in the pocket, and sat down in the armchair across from him. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "She told me she staged the ramp situation," he said. Kevin went very still. "She told you that?" "Within the first 5 minutes." "I told her," Kevin stopped. "I told her that was a very specific choice and that she should use her judgment." "Your judgment was to tell her when I was arriving."
"I may have been logistically helpful."
Kevin.
"Danny, how much did you tell her about me?"
Kevin's expression shifted through 3 different things in about 4 seconds. Relevant information, contextual details, the kind of the birthday cake. Kevin had the grace to look slightly cornered. "It's a good story." "You told her about the birthday cake before I got there?"
"I told her about the birthday cake so she would give the evening a real chance instead of talking herself out of it for the 3rd time."
Kevin leaned forward. "Danny, how was it?" Daniel looked at him for a long moment. "It was the best evening I've had in 5 years, he said. "Don't make it weird." Kevin made it slightly weird by looking like he might actually get emotional, which Daniel chose to ignore by standing up and heading toward the hallway. "Is Emma asleep?" he asked.
"Went down around 9.
She made me do the 2 shakes thing with the popcorn. Extremely precise." Daniel nodded and walked down the hall to Emma's room. He opened the door quietly. She was on her side, with the blanket pulled up to her chin, Gerald tucked under her arm, her breathing the slow, even rhythm of deep sleep. The nightlight, the one shaped like a half-moon that cast everything in warm amber, made her look very small and very peaceful. He stood in the doorway for a moment.
"Her voice is one of my favorite sounds," he had said tonight, and he'd meant it in the moment. But standing here now, he felt the truth of it with a specific weight. The questions she asked that no one else thought to ask. The way she said things with complete seriousness that landed sideways and exact. The sound of her reading out loud to Gerald in the mornings, patient and careful with every word, like the rabbit deserved her full attention. He pulled the door back to its original position, left it open 2 inches the way she preferred, and went back down the hall. Kevin was still on the couch. "You're going to see her again," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Good." Kevin stood and picked up his jacket. I think she's... "I know," Daniel said. "Go home to your wife, Kevin." "My wife wants to know everything." "Tell her it went well." "She's going to want details." "Tell her it went well and that you're not getting details." He held the door. "Thank you for pushing." Kevin stopped at the door and looked at him. "You would have gotten there eventually." "Maybe." "No," Kevin said. "You wouldn't have. You were going to survive indefinitely and call it a plan. I know you." He clapped Daniel once on the shoulder. "I'm glad you went." "Yeah," Daniel said. "Me too." He locked the door after Kevin, turned off the living room light, and stood in the kitchen for a moment in the dark. Then he took the receipt out of his jacket pocket and put it on the counter where he would see it in the morning. Just the number. Just that. He went to bed and fell asleep faster than he had in a long time. Emma found the receipt. He was making breakfast. The strawberry yogurt. The specific kind he'd remembered to restock. When she came into the kitchen in her pajamas with Gerald and the receipt in her hand, holding it up the way she held up things she found and wanted categorized. "What's this?" Daniel turned from the counter. "Where did you find that?" "Counter?" "It's a phone number." Emma looked at it. "It's a lady's handwriting." "How do you know it's a lady's handwriting?" She considered the receipt with the seriousness of a forensic analyst. "The fours. Ladies make fours differently." "That is, I'm not sure that's accurate." "Also, it smells like perfume." Daniel took the receipt from her, which Emma permitted with the air of someone who had already gathered the data she needed. "It's from dinner last night. The person I had dinner with." "The lady friend." "Sophie." Emma processed this. She set Gerald on the kitchen table, which meant she was settling in for a conversation. What's she like? He thought about how to answer that for Emma specifically. Not the managed version, not the framed version, just the true one in language Emma could actually work with. "She's honest," he said. "She says exactly what she thinks." Emma considered this seriously. "Like me?" "A little bit, yes." "What does she do?" "She's a teacher." "What grade?" "3rd through 5th, special education." Emma went quiet in the particular way she went quiet when she was running something through her internal processing. It wasn't hesitation, it was thoroughness. "Does she know about me?" Emma asked. "Yes." "What did you tell her?" "I told her you're extraordinary. I told her about Gerald. I told her about the strawberry yogurt." He slid the yogurt across to her. "She asked what you love." Emma picked up the yogurt and a spoon. "Most people ask what's wrong with me." "I know." "She asked what I love?" "First thing." Emma ate a spoonful of yogurt and looked at Gerald. Gerald, as always, offered no opinion. "Okay," she said. Okay meaning okay. She ate another spoonful. "Does she have a rabbit?" "I don't know. I didn't ask." "You should find out." "I'll add it to the list." He texted Sophie that Saturday morning, sitting at the kitchen table while Emma watched her show in the living room. "Good morning. Emma wants to know if you have a rabbit." He stared at it for a second, considered whether it was too much, decided that Sophie had specifically told him she was done with the performance, and sent it. The response came back in 4 minutes. "No rabbit. I have a succulent named Patterson." Emma is welcome to have opinions about this. He smiled at his phone in a way that would have embarrassed him if anyone had been watching. "She says Patterson sounds like a name that requires explanation." "Patterson was named by my student, Marcus. He named it during a lesson about desert ecosystems, and I didn't have the heart to change it. It's been 3 years. Marcus has good instincts. He really does." "How's Emma this morning?" "Currently consuming the specific strawberry yogurt and consulting Gerald about whether to approve of you." "And what's Gerald's position?" He looked up at the living room, where Emma had put Gerald on the couch beside her, with the rabbit facing the TV, in what she considered a good viewing angle. "Seems favorable. He's watching her show with her." High praise. He set the phone down and topped off his coffee, and the morning went on the way mornings went. The small rhythm of it, the cereal and the show, and the particular domestic hum of a Saturday with nowhere urgent to be. But something in the texture of it was slightly different. Not disrupted, just lighter. The way a room feels different after you open a window you'd gotten used to keeping closed. They talked that evening. Actual phone call, Sophie's idea, which surprised him only because texting felt lower stakes, and he'd assumed she'd stay in the lower stakes zone for a while. He was in the kitchen after Emma was down, the house quiet in that specific after-bedtime way. And when his phone rang and her name came up on the screen, he felt something in his chest that he recognized, but hadn't felt in long enough that it took him a second to name it. "Hi," he said. "Hi." Her voice was different on the phone, closer somehow, less framed by the restaurant and the candlelight and the occasion of it. "Is this okay? Calling?" "It's good. Emma's asleep. How was the rest of your day?" "Genuinely uneventful. I did laundry. I fixed a drawer that's been sticking for 2 months because Emma finally put it on the list." "The list?" "Emma has a list. Things that need to be done around the house. She updates it on Fridays and presents it with, I want to say gravitas is the right word. Full gravitas." Sophie laughed. "Does she rank them by priority?" "By category and urgency. She has a system." "I need her to come organize my classroom." "She would do it," Daniel said. "She would do it with complete seriousness, and then audit it 6 weeks later to assess whether it was holding." "I'm not joking. I genuinely want her professional opinion on my corner table layout." He was leaning against the kitchen counter, and he was smiling at the wall, and the whole thing was so unexpectedly normal. This easy, low-current warmth of talking to someone who made him want to keep talking, that it caught him off guard for a second. "How was your day?" "I had PT in the morning. Brutal, but productive. Then I graded papers for 2 hours, which was less brutal, but more demoralizing. One of my students wrote that photosynthesis is how trees sneeze out air. And the thing is, I couldn't completely disagree with the logic. Structurally, it holds together." That's exactly what I thought. I gave him 3/4 credit and a note that said, "Interesting framework, let's refine." That's the right call. "My principal would disagree." "Your principal," Daniel said carefully, "has already been established as not having the best judgment." He really hasn't. They talked for 1 hour and 15 minutes. He didn't track the time until he looked at the clock and was surprised by it. They talked about her classroom and his firm, and a renovation project he was currently drawing plans for. A family in the suburbs who wanted to add a full, accessible suite for the husband's father who was moving in. They wanted to feel like part of the house, Daniel said, not like an accommodation, like it was always supposed to be there. "Can you do that?" "I think so. I've been thinking about it differently lately." He didn't explain what lately meant, and she didn't ask, but he had a feeling she understood the timestamp. Before they got off the phone, she said, "I'm serious about meeting Emma. Not as a test of anything, just, I'd like to." "I know," he said. "I've been thinking about how to do it in a way that's right for her. Low-key. Her territory. Her terms." "Of course. Wherever she's comfortable." She suggested the park on Hadley Street. She likes the bench by the water feature because it doesn't echo. A beat. "You already asked her. She found your number on the receipt this morning and conducted a preliminary investigation," Daniel said. "By the time I got to it, she'd already rendered a provisional verdict." "And the verdict was?" "Gerald is withholding final judgment, pending the rabbit question. But the early data is promising." Sophie was quiet for a second, and he could hear the smile in it. "Next Saturday?" she said. "The park?" "Next Saturday," he said. "I'll ask Emma to prepare a list of topics." "Please do. I'll review my position on rabbits versus succulents." He said goodnight. She said goodnight. He stood in the kitchen for another minute after they hung up, the phone on the counter, the quiet house around him, and he thought, not for the first time since the parking lot outside Marchetti's, that something was shifting. Not dramatically, not in the way things shift in the stories people tell when they look back on turning points and compress them into clarity. In the slower, real way. The way a drawer that's been sticking for months
suddenly moves freely when you finally fix it. The week was ordinary in all its specifics and felt slightly extraordinary in its overall quality, which was a thing Daniel couldn't have explained to Kevin without Kevin making a face, so he didn't try. He went to work.
He drew plans for the accessible suite, and he got it right. Or close to right. Close enough that his partner, Alan, came and stood over his shoulder, looking at the drawings for a long moment and said, "This is the best thing you've drawn in 2 years. What changed?" And Daniel said, "I've been thinking about it differently," which was the same answer he'd given Sophie, and which was just as true both times. He took Emma to school on Tuesday and Thursday, and Wednesday and Friday. Same routine, same sequence, same countdown. On Wednesday, she announced at breakfast that she had decided Sophie probably had good judgment, and that the issue of rabbits could be revisited at the park meeting. Daniel asked her if she'd been deliberating all week. She said she'd consulted Gerald. Daniel asked what Gerald had concluded. Emma said Gerald believed in gathering information before forming permanent positions, which was good advice for everyone. He agreed that it was. He texted Sophie on Wednesday evening, just a brief exchange. She'd had a hard day. One of her students had a difficult morning, and she'd spent 2 hours doing quiet containment work with him before he was regulated enough to join the class. And she was tired in the specific, bone-deep way of people who give an enormous amount of themselves and feel the depletion honestly. "How do you come back from days like that?" he asked. "Patterson," she said. "I talked to him. He doesn't respond, but he's a very stable presence." "What do you tell him?" "Today I told him that Marcus did eventually calm down, and that by the end of the day he'd built a very precise tower out of blocks, and showed it to me with exactly the expression that makes all the 2-hour mornings worth it." The expression. You know the one. The, "I did this, and I need you to see that I did this." He did know that one. He knew it precisely. Emma made that face with the strawberry yogurt when she'd arranged the table exactly right. And with Gerald when she'd dressed him in a new outfit she'd fashioned from a sock. And sometimes, the best times, with her reading, when she got through a hard page and looked up to see if he'd noticed. "I know exactly that expression," he said. "I thought you might," she said. Saturday arrived with the particular quality of a day that is trying to be good to you. Clear sky. October cold, but the clean kind, not the damp kind. Emma was up before him. He could hear her moving around in her room, the soft, purposeful sounds of someone conducting preparations. He knocked. "You decent?" "I'm selecting Gerald's outfit," she said. "This is an important meeting." "It is," he agreed, through the door. "Don't overthink it." "Gerald is wearing the blue." "Good call." He made breakfast. Emma appeared in the kitchen 22 minutes later, Gerald tucked under her arm in a small blue sweater that she'd actually constructed herself from a scrap of fabric Kevin's wife had given her. And her expression was the careful, processing one that meant she had been thinking about something for a while. "What if she doesn't like me?" Emma said. He turned from the stove. "What?" "Sophie, what if she's nice to me because she likes you, but she doesn't actually like me?" He came around the counter and crouched down to her level. "That's a fair thing to think about," he said. "It's a real concern." "Most people are nice to me in the wrong way." "I know. The way where they talk slower and bigger, like I can't understand regular talking." "I know that way. I don't like that way either." Emma held Gerald a little tighter. "What if she does that?" "If she does that," Daniel said carefully, "then we leave the park. We come home, we make grilled cheese, and we don't see Sophie again. That's allowed. Your comfort is the thing that matters." Emma thought about this. "But you like her." "I do." "Would you be sad?" He looked at his daughter's silver-gray eyes, fully serious, taking his emotional temperature with the accuracy she always had. "A little,"
he said honestly.
But not as sad as I'd be if I made you spend time with someone who made you feel small. That's not a trade I make. Ever. Emma absorbed this in her thorough way.
Okay, she said. Okay, meaning, let's go find out. He stood up and felt something he could only describe as the particular pride of being exactly the father he was trying to be, arriving unexpectedly in the middle of an ordinary Saturday. Sophie was already at the park when they arrived. She had texted him 20 minutes ago. "I'm early, sorry, I'm a habitually early person, occupational hazard." And he'd texted back that they were on their way, and now he could see her by the bench near the water feature, the one that didn't echo, because he had told her the specific bench, and she had remembered and gone to exactly that one. Emma saw her from across the park path and stopped walking. Daniel stopped too. He didn't push, didn't prompt. He waited. Emma was looking at the wheelchair, not in the startled or uncomfortable way, in her own way, which was the direct and information-gathering way she looked at everything new. She was cataloging. She was placing it into her understanding of how the world was arranged. "Her legs don't work right," Emma said. "That's right," Daniel said. "She uses the chair to get around." "Does it hurt?" "I think it did for a while. Now it's just how she moves." Emma considered this. "Gerald has a leg that flops wrong," she said. "I sewed it, but it still flops. He doesn't mind." "That's a good way to think about it," Daniel said. Emma started walking again. Sophie saw them coming and waited without waving or standing or making any kind of performative gesture of enthusiasm, which Daniel suspected was either natural or deliberate or both. And either way, it was exactly right. "Hi," Sophie said when they were close. She said it to Emma, not to Daniel. Just to Emma, at Emma's level. Eye contact easy and direct without being forced. Emma stopped 2 feet away and looked at her with the full attention look. "Hi," she said. "You're Sophie." "I am. You're Emma." "Yes." Emma looked at Gerald. "This is Gerald." "Hi, Gerald," Sophie said, without any condescension in it at all. Just acknowledging the introduction the way you acknowledge any introduction. "I've heard a lot about you." Emma's eyes moved from Sophie's face to the wheelchair to Sophie's face again. "Does your chair have a name?" "It doesn't," Sophie said. "I never thought to give it one. Do you think it should?" Emma considered this seriously. "Probably. Things work better when they have names." "What would you name it?" Emma looked at the wheelchair with the expression of someone doing actual work. "Douglas," she said finally. "Douglas," Sophie repeated, like she was trying it out. "I think that works." "Douglas, it is." Emma nodded once, the decisive nod of someone whose contribution has been received properly. Then she looked at Daniel, and then back at Sophie. "My dad says you have a plant named Patterson." "I do. Named by one of my students. Marcus," Sophie blinked. "Your dad told you about Marcus?" "He told me Marcus has good instincts." "He really does," Sophie said. "He's one of the most interesting people I've ever met." Emma sat down on the bench beside Sophie, not pressed up against her, but close, which for Emma was significant, and held Gerald in her lap and said, "Tell me something Marcus did." And Sophie told her, not a simplified version, not a child-friendly adaptation, just a real story about a real kid, told the way you tell stories about people you actually know and actually care about. About the block tower and the expression. About the time Marcus had spent 45 minutes arranging colored pencils in a precise spectrum during free time, and then, when the bell rang, had looked at Sophie and said, "That's what better feels like," with more calm and self-knowledge than most adults Sophie had ever met. Emma listened without interrupting, which she sometimes did and sometimes didn't, depending on whether the thing being said deserved her full attention or only part of it.
This was clearly getting all of it.
I do that,
Emma said when Sophie finished.
the arranging things. It feels like finishing a sentence.
That's the best description of it I've ever heard, Sophie said. Emma looked at her with the silver-gray eyes that didn't miss anything.
You talk normally,
she said. So do you, Sophie said. Emma absorbed this.
Some people talk bigger.
I know that kind. I don't like that kind.
Me neither.
They sat on the bench by the water feature for a long time, the three of them, and Gerald, and somewhere in the background, the city doing its Saturday things, unaware and unconcerned. Daniel sat on the far end of the bench and watched his daughter talk to this woman about Marcus and sensory stations and the relative merits of rabbits versus succulents. Emma's position was that succulents were low-effort pets, and that Patterson was probably fine, but Gerald had more personality. Sophie's position was that Patterson's quiet consistency was underrated. And he thought about what it had cost each of them to get to this bench. The 5 years of doing it alone. The 3 years of learning to move differently through the world. The small, deliberate acts of courage that don't look like courage from the outside, because they look like just showing up to a park on a Saturday with a stuffed rabbit. He thought about Sophie saying, "I'm afraid I've built a very elegant wall," and told myself it was architecture. He thought about himself in Emma's doorway 3 months ago, falling apart for 20 minutes before putting himself back together for breakfast. He thought about what Kevin had said. You were going to survive indefinitely and call it a plan. He wasn't surviving right now. He was sitting on a bench in a park on a clear October morning, and his daughter was telling the woman she'd just met that Douglas was a good name for a wheelchair because things with names had better outcomes. And that woman was laughing, her quick, real laugh that changed her face. And the world was not fixed, not resolved, not any of the things it would need to be for the story to be over. Just good. Right now. Just genuinely good. Emma looked over at him suddenly, the way she did when she'd reached a conclusion she needed to share. Dad? Yeah?
Gerald says yes.
He looked at her. Yes to what? Emma gestured between him and Sophie with the gravity of a judge delivering a verdict.
Just yes, she said. He says you can figure out the rest.
Sophie met Daniel's eyes over the top of Emma's head. She pressed her lips together to contain the smile, but didn't fully manage it. He didn't fully manage it either. Tell Gerald thank you, he said. Emma looked at Gerald and reported this in a low, professional voice. Then she looked back at Sophie. Can we talk more about Marcus? I have some questions about the pencil spectrum. I think I do something similar, but with a slightly different methodology. I would love to hear your methodology, Sophie said. And Emma began to explain, and Daniel put his arm along the back of the bench and leaned back and looked up at the October sky and thought. For the first time in 5 years, without a single qualifier attached to it. Yes. 3 weeks. That's how long it took for Sophie Navarro to become a regular feature of the Carter household's Saturday mornings, which was not something Daniel had planned, not something he'd proposed or negotiated or carefully arranged, but something that had simply happened with the organic inevitability of water finding its level. Emma had asked, the first Saturday after the park, whether Sophie was coming again. Daniel had texted Sophie to ask. Sophie had said yes before he'd finished typing the question, and it went from there. The park gave way to the kitchen table, which happened on the third Saturday when it started raining 20 minutes into their walk, and Emma decided, with the executive authority she applied to most decisions, that they should go back to the apartment, because Gerald didn't like getting wet. Sophie had looked at Daniel with a question in her eyes, and he'd said, "You're welcome to come in." And she had. And that was the end of the park phase, and the beginning of something closer and harder to name. Sophie fit into the apartment the way people fit into spaces when they're paying attention to the space.
She noticed the threshold of the front door and navigated it without making it a moment. She learned quickly which path through the living room gave her the most clearance. She asked once about the cabinet height in the kitchen, and then never mentioned it again because she'd solved it herself. She didn't perform comfort, and she didn't perform difficulty. She was just there, in the practical and present way of someone who has learned to be exactly where they are. Emma showed her the list on the third visit, the actual Friday list, the household task document, updated weekly, categorized by urgency and type, presented with the full formal weight Emma gave it. Sophie studied it for a solid 2 minutes without saying anything, and then she said, "Your drainage category is under-leveraged. You have 3 items that should be subdivided."
Emma looked at her. "Explain." "The slow bathroom sink and the kitchen faucet drip are plumbing adjacent, but the window condensation is actually insulation related. They shouldn't share a category." Emma turned to Daniel with an expression he recognized as the one that meant someone had said something correct that she hadn't thought of first. "She's right," Emma said. "I'll update the list," Daniel said. "I'll do it," Emma said, already reaching for the clipboard. Daniel looked at Sophie. Sophie looked at Daniel. Neither of them said anything, but something in the exchange, the ordinary domestic rightness of it, the way Emma had simply incorporated Sophie's observation into her system without ceremony, settled somewhere in his chest with a warmth he was beginning to recognize as the specific feeling of something being good in a way you hadn't let yourself expect. He told Kevin about it on a Thursday evening, the two of them at Kevin's kitchen table, with the remains of a pizza between them, while Kevin's wife put their kids to bed upstairs. He didn't mean to get into the full version of it. He'd come over to return a power drill and ended up staying. But Kevin had that quality of pulling things out of you without appearing to try, which was both his best and occasionally most aggravating characteristic. "She fixes the list," Kevin said. "She subdivides the categories. Emma has adopted the methodology." "Danny?" "What?" "You're in trouble," Kevin said, with complete warmth. "I'm aware." "In the good way." "I know what way it's in, Kevin." Kevin leaned back in his chair and looked at him with the expression of a man watching something he'd hoped for arriving on schedule. "Have you told her?" "Told her what?" "That we've known each other 3 weeks. Danny, I know your face. I've known your face since we were 23 years old, living in that apartment on Mercer Street, where the heat only worked on Tuesdays. That is not the face of a man who's taking it slow because he's uncertain." Daniel looked at the pizza box. "It's the face of a man who has a 7-year-old daughter who has already named Sophie's wheelchair and incorporated her organizational philosophy into the Friday list, and who needs to be very careful about what he brings into that child's life and what he allows to become part of her routine before he knows it's solid." Kevin was quiet for a moment. "That's fair," he said. "That's genuinely fair." A pause. "But you're also allowed to be a person, Danny, not just a father." "I know that. Emma is not the only reason you'd be scared." Daniel looked at him. "You loved Lisa for 8 years, Kevin said quietly. "And then she packed her bags and drove away. That does something to a person. It's allowed to have done something to you." The kitchen was quiet. Upstairs, Kevin's youngest was asking for a glass of water, in the particular tone of someone who is not actually thirsty, but is conducting a delay operation. "I think about it," Daniel said finally, "whether I'm moving towards something or just away from something." "Yeah. And?" He thought about Sophie on the bench at the park, telling Emma about Marcus with the same full attention she gave everything. He thought about her voice on the phone, the close, warm quality of it. He thought about the way she'd said yes when he'd asked if she wanted to do this again. Flat and real. No performance. "I think I'm moving toward something," he said. "I think that's what this is." Kevin nodded once. "Then tell her that. When it's right. Don't wait until the perfect moment, Danny. Perfect moments are very good at not showing up. He drove home with Kevin's voice in his ears and Sophie's number in his phone, and the particular restless awareness of a man standing at the edge of something real, deciding whether to step. He didn't have to decide for long. The following Tuesday, Sophie called him at 7:45 in the evening, and he could tell from the first two words that something was wrong. "I need a minute," she said. "I'm fine. Can you talk?" "I'm here," he said immediately. He was in the kitchen, but he moved to the hallway, lowering his voice. "What happened?" He heard her take a slow breath. "I had a meeting today with the district office about my classroom." "The sensory modifications?" "They're reassigning me mid-year." Her voice was controlled, the way her voice was always controlled, but underneath it, he could hear the effort it was taking. "Budget restructuring. They're consolidating the special ed program across 2 schools, which means my class is being folded into the program at Linden Elementary, which is across town, which means my kids, my specific kids, the ones I've been working with since September, the ones who have routines and relationships and who have finally started—" She stopped. Marcus has finally started having good mornings. He's been regulated for 3 weeks. 3 weeks in a row, which his mother cried about when I told her, because they haven't had 3 weeks in a row since he started school. "Sophie." "And now they want to move him to a classroom with a teacher who's never met him, in the middle of the year, because it's more efficient for the budget." "When?" "January. 8 weeks." He sat down on the hallway floor without fully deciding to. "What can you do about it?" "I filed an objection today. My principal filed one too. I'll give him credit for that. The parents have the right to appeal the reassignment, and I've already started calling them to explain what's happening so they can make that decision with full information." A pause. "But Daniel, the district has done this before. The appeals process takes 6 to 8 weeks, and the decision rarely changes. They have the authority and the money rationale. And in my experience, that combination wins. What does your union say?" "That I have standing to protest the reassignment process, which I'm doing. But that doesn't help Marcus in January." He was quiet for a moment, thinking, what does Marcus need, specifically, to survive the transition if you can't stop it? She paused. He could tell the question had caught her slightly off guard, that she'd been braced for sympathy, for "I'm so sorry," delivered in the face-making way, and instead had gotten something more practical. "Continuity," she said. "Documentation. Every modification, every accommodation, everything I know about him written down so thoroughly that whoever gets him can't pretend they don't know. And someone in that new classroom who will actually read it." "Can you request to meet the new teacher before January?" "I can request it. They're not required to accommodate." "Request it anyway, in writing, with the union copied. Make it something they have to respond to on record." He paused. "Do you want me to? I know I'm not an education person, but I know how institutions handle paper trails. If you want an outside set of eyes on the documentation you're building, I'm here." Another pause, longer this time. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know I don't have to. It's a lot of—" "Sophie." He kept his voice gentle, but direct. "I'm not offering because I'm trying to fix something. I'm offering because you called me at 7:45 on a Tuesday, and that means you needed somewhere to put this. And I'd like to be somewhere you can put things, if that's okay." The line was quiet for a moment. "That's okay," she said, quieter than before. "Good." "I'm really angry," she said, in case that wasn't clear under all the practical planning language. "It was clear," he said. "You're allowed to be. This is worth being angry about." "I keep thinking about Marcus's face when the pencil tower is done. That expression." "I know." "A new teacher isn't going to know to watch for that. They're not going to know what it means when he goes quiet in a specific way
versus a different specific way.
They're not going to know that the lunch change on Tuesdays is manageable if you warn him Monday afternoon, but a crisis if he finds out at noon on the day. Then we document it all, Daniel said. Every single thing, with enough specificity that it can't be dismissed or overlooked. We, she said. We, he confirmed. Another silence, different from the ones before. I've been doing things on my own for a long time, she said. It's a habit.
I know. I have the same habit.
It's a hard one to break. It is, he said, but I think we're both overdue. He heard her exhale slowly. When she spoke again, the edge in her voice had changed. Not gone, but different. Held differently. Thank you, she said, for not doing the face. Over the phone, the face is physically impossible. She made a sound that was almost a laugh. That might be the main benefit of phone calls. I'll add it to the list. Behind the warm voice thing. There's a list? There's always a list. Emma's rubbing off on me. This time, she did laugh, and he held on to the sound of it in the way you hold on to something that costs you nothing, but matters more than it should. They spent 3 evenings that week on video call, with Sophie's documentation spread across her kitchen table and Daniel's laptop open. He sat at his own kitchen table after Emma was asleep, and Sophie sat in her apartment across town, and they built the file together. Him asking questions, her answering with the specific granular knowledge of someone who had spent months learning one particular child's entire interior weather system. What about transitions between activities? Daniel said on the second night. He needs a 5-minute warning, not a 2-minute, 5, and the person giving it has to say his name first before the warning. Otherwise, the warning doesn't register as being for him. Marcus, 5-minute warning. Exactly. Does it matter what tone? Neutral. Not cheery. Cheery feels like performance to him, and he clocks it as unreliable. Daniel typed. What about sensory needs during unstructured time? He does better with something in his hands, not a fidget toy. He finds those condescending because they're marketed as kid things. Give him a pen. A real pen, not a pencil. The weight matters. A real pen. Black ink, medium point. He borrows mine every day. I bought 6 extras and keep them in my desk. Daniel stopped typing for a second. She didn't notice, or noticed and said nothing, because she was moving on to the next item. But he had stopped because of the 6 pens in the desk. The specificity of it, the completeness of caring for someone that way. Buying 6 extras for a child who needed the weight of a real pen in his hand. And he thought, not for the first time, that Sophie Navarro was one of the finest people he had encountered in his life. He said so after they'd wrapped up for the night. The 6 pens, he said. What about them? The 6 pens. Daniel, you bought 6 extra pens so you'd always have one available for a child who needed a real pen, not a fidget toy. Because the weight matters, and you paid enough attention to know it mattered. A pause. That's a very basic teaching thing. It's really not, he said. I've sat across from a lot of teachers in a lot of meetings in the last 5 years. What you're describing is not a basic teaching thing. She was quiet. I just wanted to say it out loud, he said, because I think people should hear the true things about themselves sometimes, even when they're used to managing without the acknowledgement. You're doing the thing, she said softly. What thing? The thing where you see people accurately and say it without making them feel like a project. A pause. It's a very specific thing, and not many people do it. I learned it from Emma, he said honestly. She has no interest in the edited version of anything. It reforms you. He heard Sophie shift, the small sound of her moving in her chair. How is she, this week? She asked if you were coming Saturday. And,
I said I'd ask. Yes, Sophie said immediately. Tell her yes. I'll tell her. She'll tell Gerald. Gerald will update his position accordingly. I've been thinking about getting Gerald a companion, Sophie said. A companion rabbit? A small one, for Patterson's shelf. I thought Emma might like to name it.
He was quiet for a second, and what he felt was not a small thing. And he was aware it was not a small thing. And he thought about what Kevin had said. Tell her. And thought about the perfect moment that was very good at not showing up. Sophie, he said. I want to say something, and I want you to just let it land without analyzing the timing. A pause. Okay. I haven't felt this way, this particular way, in a very long time. And I'm not saying it to put pressure on anything. I'm saying it because you told me on our first night that you were done performing and done managing, and I think I owe you the same. So, he stopped, started again. I'm glad you set up the ramp situation. I'm glad Kevin told you about the birthday cake. I'm glad Emma found the receipt. I'm glad about all of it. And I think you should know that. The silence on the other end of the phone was not the empty kind. I know it, Sophie said finally. I've known it for a couple of weeks. I was waiting to see if you'd say it. Claudia told you to wait? Claudia told me not to say it first, because I always say everything first, and it was someone else's turn. Claudia is very strategic. She's going to want a full debrief. Tell her the pen detail. She'll appreciate it. Sophie laughed, and then she said, I feel that way too, since you're collecting data. Good, he said. That's good. And it was. It genuinely was. In the uncomplicated and unqualified way that good things sometimes simply are. Saturday came. Sophie arrived at 10, and Emma met her at the door with Gerald and a printed amendment to the Friday list that incorporated Sophie's subcategory feedback, laminated, which Emma presented with the gravity of a legal document. Sophie read it thoroughly before responding. This is correct, she said. Well executed. Emma accepted this verdict with a nod. I have questions about Marcus's pencil system, she said. I've been developing a modified version. Show me. They settled at the kitchen table, Emma spreading out a collection of pens and pencils arranged in a sequence that had its own internal logic. Sophie leaning forward with genuine focus, and Daniel stood at the counter, making coffee and watching the two of them. And thought about what it meant to be seen, fully, in all your specific and particular parts, and to have that be the thing that drew someone toward you, rather than away. He was still in this thought when his phone buzzed on the counter. He picked it up without looking at the name and glanced at the screen. The coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. The name on the screen was Lisa. He hadn't heard from Lisa in 14 months. A brief formal exchange about some paperwork that needed to be signed, handled through emails mostly. Nothing that sounded like her voice or required him to hear it. Before that, it had been longer. They existed now in the category of people who had once shared everything and had since reduced the overlap to almost nothing. A formality, an occasional necessity, nothing that intruded on the actual living of either of their lives. He looked at the notification. Not a text, a phone call, currently ringing. From the kitchen table, Emma said, The black ink ones are the foundation. Everything builds from the anchor color. And Sophie said, Marcus uses the same logic. He calls it the spine of the sequence. And Emma made a sound of intense, focused recognition. Daniel stepped into the hallway and answered, Lisa. Daniel. A pause. Her voice was exactly the same. That particular quality he'd spent 8 years knowing. Slightly low. Precise. Each word fully formed. I'm sorry to call without warning. It's fine. I've been thinking about reaching out for a while. I wasn't sure if... She stopped. How are you? I'm well. Emma is well. I know, I asked Kevin about her a few weeks ago. He told me she was doing well. A pause. He wasn't particularly warm about the conversation. Kevin loves Emma. I know he does. The hallway was quiet. From the kitchen, he could hear Emma's voice, patient and precise, explaining her methodology to Sophie. He moved further down the hall, toward the bedroom. What do you need, Lisa? Not unkind, just direct. I want to see her, Lisa said. Emma, I've been in therapy for about a year, and I've been doing a lot of work on what happened, and I've come to a place where I think I need to face it, what I did. I need to at least try to. Lisa, I know I don't have standing. I know I walked away. I know that whatever rights I'm exercising here are moral ones, not legal ones. I'm not trying to... I need you to stop talking for a second, Daniel said. She stopped. He stood in the hallway with his eyes closed for a moment and did what he always did in the moments that required his most careful self. He felt the full weight of it before he responded to any part of it. His ex-wife, the woman who had looked at the life they were building, the specific, demanding, love-requiring life of raising a daughter who needed more and different things and had decided it was too much, who had packed her bags with the decision already made, too far along for conversation, who had left Emma at 2 years old without the knowledge of what that departure would cost her daughter to carry later. The woman who had told him, I can't do this, Daniel. Like the honesty of it made it acceptable. And here, in the kitchen, was Emma, 7 years old, laminating amendments to her Friday list, teaching a woman she'd known for 3 weeks about the foundation colors of a pencil taxonomy, using words like anchor and spine with complete authority. What does therapy have you wanting from this conversation? Daniel asked. Specifically. I'm not going to make this easy, Lisa. I'm not going to be cruel, but I'm not going to make it easy. I don't expect easy. What do you want? I want to see Emma. I want... if she'll allow it. I'm not asking to be her mother. I stopped being that when I left, and I know it. I'm asking for a chance to look her in the face and tell her the truth about why I left, in language she can understand, so that when she's old enough to be angry about it, which she will be, she has an actual answer and not just a hole. Daniel's jaw tightened. That's for her, Lisa said, not for me. I've been told it's for me, and maybe partially, but I know my daughter. She needs things to make sense. She always did. She would rather have a hard, true thing than a comfortable nothing. He stayed quiet. I know, Lisa said, softer now, that I have no right to ask you to make this easier. I know what I put you through. I know you've carried it all. I'm not asking you to forgive me tonight. I'm asking you to think about whether Emma deserves the chance to decide for herself. He stood in the hallway for a long moment. From the kitchen, Emma's voice. The system only works if you commit to the anchor. If you change the anchor, everything else has to recalibrate. You can't just shift the middle. Sophie's voice. Marcus once told me the same thing about breakfast. If breakfast changes, the whole morning has to rebuild. Emma. Yes, exactly. He understands systems. Daniel breathed. I'll think about it, he said. That's all I can give you right now. Yes, that's more than I expected. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. Emma makes this decision with me. Not for me, with me. She's old enough. I'll talk to her, and I'll let you know. Okay. And Lisa. Yeah? Whatever she decides, you accept it. No pressure, no guilt, no strategic slow building. Whatever she says is the answer. We clear? A pause. We're clear, Lisa said quietly.
He hung up. He stood in the hallway for a minute, phone in his hand, and let the particular heaviness of it settle the way it needed to settle. The past and the present and the shape of the future all occurring at the same time, in a hallway that was 12 feet long and full of framed photos and Emma's most recent artwork taped to the wall. He thought about what Sophie had said. "I've built a very elegant wall," and told myself it was architecture.
He thought about Emma saying, "You can't just shift the middle. If you change the anchor, everything has to recalibrate." He took a breath and walked back to the kitchen. Sophie looked up when he came in. She read his face the way she read things, completely, without performance. She didn't ask. She just met his eyes with the quiet steadiness of someone who was present. "Everything okay?" she said. Emma looked up too, her forensic attention fully deployed. "I need to talk to Emma about something later," Daniel said. "Right now," he looked at both of them. The laminated list on the table, the pencil system in progress, the kitchen that felt like the right kind of ordinary. "Right now is good. I want to stay in right now." Sophie held his gaze for a moment and then nodded, once, the way she nodded when she'd understood something completely and didn't need to add to it. "Okay," Emma said, accepting this with her efficient practicality. "Then come look at the anchor system. Sophie thinks the medium-weight blue might work as a secondary foundation, which I have questions about." He sat down at the table. Sophie passed him a pen, a real one, medium point, black ink. He took it, and the weight of it was exactly right, and for a moment the past and the future both sat quietly and let him have the present, which was the only place anything real ever happened anyway. He told Emma that night, not all of it, not the therapy, not the year of work Lisa had described, not the particular language about wanting to look her in the face and tell her the truth. He told her the essential thing, that her mother had called, and that her mother wanted to see her, and that Emma did not have to say yes, and that whatever she decided was the right answer. Emma was in her pajamas. Gerald was on her lap. The nightlight made the room warm and amber and small in the best way. She didn't say anything for a long time after he finished. She looked at Gerald with the expression that meant she was running it all the way through. "Why now?" she asked. "She's been doing some thinking, some work on herself." "For how long?" "About a year." Emma considered this. She waited a year to call. She wasn't sure if it was the right thing. "Is it the right thing?" "I don't know," Daniel said honestly. "That's why I'm asking you." Emma looked at Gerald. "Gerald doesn't have an opinion yet," she said. "He needs more data." "Fair. Do you want me to see her?" He was quiet for a moment. This was the question that mattered, and Emma always found the question that mattered. "I want you to do what's true for you," he said. "Not what's easiest for me. Not what you think I want. The true thing." "The true thing is, I don't know," Emma said. "She left when I was 2. I don't remember her. She's not a person to me yet. She's more like a category." "A category." "Like, I know what she is. I don't know who she is. Those are different." Daniel looked at his daughter and felt the familiar ache of her precision. The way she cut straight to the structural truth of things, without the protective softness most people wrapped around hard facts. "Yes," he said, "they are different." "If I meet her," Emma said carefully, "she might become a person, and then things would be more complicated." "They might be. But if I don't meet her, she stays a category forever, and categories don't answer questions. They just sit there." "That's also true." Emma was quiet again. She straightened Gerald's blue sweater with one finger, a small, precise adjustment. "I want to think about it," she said. "For a week.
Can she wait a week? She can wait as long as you need. A week, Emma said firmly. Then I'll know. He kissed her forehead. You know what you are? He said.
Extraordinary, she said, in the tone of someone reporting a known fact. Exactly right, he said. He told Sophie the next day. Not a phone call. She was at his kitchen table, the Marcus documentation spread between them for a final review before Sophie submitted the formal appeal packet. And he told her the way you tell things to someone who has become the person you tell things to. Directly, without framing it first. Sophie listened without interrupting, the way she always listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, turning her pen slowly in her hand. How are you? She said. Not Emma. You. He thought about it. Complicated. She's working on herself, and I believe that. I don't think she called out of strategy. But belief doesn't erase what happened. Those two things are just both true. Can they stay both true? I think they have to, he said. For Emma's sake, I can't let my version of the story be the only one available to her. She deserves to build her own. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. That, she said quietly, is one of the most grown things I've ever heard a person say about someone who hurt them. I've had 5 years to practice. Practice doesn't make that easy. No, he agreed. It doesn't. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. Briefly, simply. The way you do when words are the right size, but touch is the right shape. He turned his hand over and held hers for a moment, and neither of them said anything, and that was enough. The appeal, she said then, pulling her hand back and picking up the pen. The appeal, he confirmed. They went back to work. Emma's week passed with the same deliberate rhythm of all her weeks. The routine, the list, the mornings and the afternoons, and the specific strawberry yogurt. She didn't bring up Lisa again until Thursday evening, when she came into the kitchen where Daniel was washing dishes and stood at the counter with Gerald and said, I've decided. He turned off the water and turned around. Okay. I'll meet her once, in a place I choose. And you have to be there. Not hovering, just in the room. And after, I decide if there's a next time. Those are good terms, Daniel said. Gerald agrees. When do you want to do it? Emma thought. After Thanksgiving, when school is out. I don't want a hard thing during a school week because the mornings matter. After Thanksgiving, he said. I'll let her know. Emma nodded and started to leave the kitchen, then stopped. Dad? Yeah? Sophie should know, because she's part of our system now, and when something big happens in the system, everyone should know. He looked at his daughter, who was 7 years old, and had just used the word system to describe what had quietly, organically, entirely naturally built itself in the space of 5 weeks around the three of them. I'll tell her, he said. Good. Emma adjusted Gerald's sweater. Also, we're out of the specific yogurt. I'll get it tomorrow. It has to be the one with the strawberry pieces, not the Emma. I know. She nodded, satisfied, and left the kitchen. Daniel stood at the sink with the water off and the dish in his hand and the word system still sitting in the room. He called Sophie that night and told her. He told her Emma's terms, Emma's timeline, Emma's specific instruction that Sophie should know because she was part of the system now. He said that last part carefully, aware of the weight of it, aware that 7-year-olds don't use words like system carelessly. Sophie was quiet for a moment after he finished. Part of the system, she said. Her words. That's... Daniel, do you understand what that means? Coming from her specifically? From the way she thinks about things? I think I do, he said. That's why I called. Another silence. The kind that was full rather than empty. I'm honored, Sophie said finally. And she said it simply, without deflection or minimizing.
I want you to know that I take that seriously. I don't take it as a casual thing. I know you don't.
I've been thinking, she said, about the wall, the one Claudia identified. And I want to tell you something. Okay? I don't think it's there anymore. Or, it's there, but the door is open. I've been aware of it being open for a few weeks, and I kept waiting for the moment where I'd want to close it, because closing it felt safer. And the moment hasn't come. A pause. I think that's because of you. Both of you.
Emma had a lot to do with it, Daniel said.
Emma is very hard to be defended against, Sophie agreed. She's extremely direct, and she named my wheelchair Douglas on day 1. You don't recover from that. You just get attached. He was leaning against the kitchen counter again, in the same spot he'd stood the first night she'd called. And the kitchen was the same kitchen it had always been. But the quality of standing in it was different. Had been different for weeks. He was aware of this in the specific way you become aware of something that has changed gradually, and then all at once. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask. Whatever this is, whatever we're building, I want to build it for real. I'm not asking you to define it tonight or put a name on it or commit to a timeline. I want to say out loud that I'm in it, that I'm not testing it or holding back some percentage of myself in case it doesn't work. I'm in it. And I want you to know that. The line was quiet. I'm in it too, Sophie said. I want you to know that too. Good, he said. That's the only thing I needed to know. The appeal didn't stop the reassignment. The district upheld its decision in early December, 3 weeks before the winter break. Sophie got the letter on a Wednesday and called him on her way home from school. And he could hear the particular quality of her voice. Not broken, Sophie didn't break, but pressed down, the way strong things get pressed by heavy weights. I'm sorry, he said. I knew it was likely, she said. I prepared for it. I told myself I was prepared for it. Preparing and arriving are different things. Yes, she said, they are. What can you do? I'm meeting the Linden teacher next week. I requested it in writing, with the union copied, the way you suggested. She agreed, which tells me she's at least a person who responds to formal requests, which is better than nothing. A pause. I'm bringing the full documentation packet. Everything about Marcus. Every pen, every morning pattern. Every way the day builds from the anchor. I'm going to sit across from her and make sure she understands that she is receiving someone's whole world in her classroom, and that it deserves full attention. She'll hear you, Daniel said. If she's the kind of person who agreed to meet, she'll hear you. You don't know that. No, he admitted, but I know you. And I know that when you sit across from someone and tell them something true without managing them, it lands. It always lands. Sophie was quiet for a moment. How do you know that? Because it's what you did to me on the first night, before the tort, before the parking lot, before Gerald cast his vote. You told me a true thing, flat and real, and it landed, and I never fully recovered. He heard her breathe. I'm going to fight for him, she said. Until January and past January, and as long as it takes. I know you are, he said. I'll be there. You keep saying that. I keep meaning it. The meeting with the Linden teacher happened on a Thursday. Sophie came to the apartment afterward, later than expected, and when Daniel opened the door, he could see from her face that it had gone somewhere real. Emma was still up. It was only 8. And Emma's bedtime on Thursdays was 8:30, and she looked at Sophie from the couch with the precise attentiveness she always brought to Sophie's face when Sophie arrived. Good or bad? Emma said. Both, Sophie said, coming in. Good in the ways that matter. Emma accepted this and moved over on the couch to make room, which she only did for 2 people in the world. Sophie sat. Daniel made tea. He brought it out and sat in the armchair and listened while Sophie told them about the Linden teacher. Her name was Miss Patricia Osei. She was 34 years old. She had 6 years in special education. She had a student last year with similar sensory needs who had thrived after a hard transition, and she had read every page of the documentation packet before Sophie arrived and had questions. Real ones. About the pencil weight, and the 5-minute warning, and the Tuesday lunch protocol. She asked about the pencil? Emma said. She asked about the weight, and why medium point specifically. And I told her about the grain of the ink on paper, and how Marcus had described it once as the right kind of resistance, like the pen knows it's working. Sophie held her tea with both hands. She wrote it down, circled it. She circled it, Daniel said, with a pen, medium point. Emma looked at Gerald. Gerald says that's a good sign. Gerald is a perceptive rabbit, Sophie said. He's been reliable so far, Emma agreed. Sophie looked at Daniel over the top of Emma's head. Her eyes were still tired, still carrying the weight of the loss. Because it was a loss, the reassignment, whatever good the meeting had produced. But underneath the tiredness was something else. Something like the specific peace of a person who has done everything that could be done and accepted what remained. He's going to be okay, Sophie said. It was quiet and sure. Not because the system is fixed. It isn't. But because Ms. Osei circled the pen detail, and the people who circle the pen detail, they see the child. They do the work. Like you, Emma said. Sophie looked at Emma. What? You see the child, Emma said, with the flat certainty she used when she was reporting observable fact. You saw me. Before you met me, you asked what I love, not what I have, what I love. She looked at Gerald and then back at Sophie. That's seeing the child. The room was quiet. Sophie set her tea down carefully on the coffee table. Her jaw moved slightly, the small movement of someone holding something that is trying to be bigger than the moment allows. Emma, she said. Yes. You are one of the most extraordinary people I have ever met. Emma considered this for a moment. I know, she said. My dad says so. A pause. But it's better when other people say it too. Daniel laughed. A real one. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and doesn't apologize for itself. And Sophie laughed too. And Emma looked at them both with a satisfied expression of someone who has correctly identified the funniest true thing in the room. Thanksgiving was its own quiet miracle. Kevin and his family came. Sophie came. This was not negotiated or announced. Emma simply included her on the Wednesday list under Thursday logistics. Sophie, dinner, the good plates. And Claudia came too, because Sophie had warned Daniel that Claudia was going to want to assess him in person, and that resistance was inadvisable. Claudia arrived with a sweet potato casserole and spent the first 20 minutes watching Daniel with the focused attention of a person who has been fully briefed and is now running independent verification. At some point in the early afternoon, while Kevin and his wife were managing their kids in the living room, and Emma was in the kitchen narrating to Gerald the proper procedure for setting the table with maximum efficiency, Claudia came and stood next to Daniel at the counter and said, without preamble, "You're real." "I am," Daniel agreed. "She told me you don't do the face." "I try not to." "She also told me you offered to help with the Marcus documentation at 10 o'clock at night, without being asked, and without making it about what a good person you were for offering. It needed to be done." "That," Claudia said, "is exactly the right answer." She picked up her coffee and looked at him steadily. "She's been behind glass for 3 years. I want you to know that I know that, and I want you to know that I'm watching. And I want you to know that if the glass goes back up because of something you did, we will have a different conversation." "That's fair," Daniel said.
I'm not trying to be threatening. You're being a good friend, he said. I hope Emma has someone like you in 20 years. Claudia looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, with the crisp precision of someone closing a file.
Good answer, she said, and went to find Sophie. After dinner, after Kevin's kids had been corralled and the dishes had been mostly handled, and Emma had fallen asleep on the couch with Gerald in the amber light of the living room, Daniel and Sophie sat on the back steps of the apartment building in the November cold. Just the two of them, jackets on, the night clear and very still. Good day, Sophie said. Good day, he agreed. Emma orchestrated the whole table layout. She's been planning it since Monday. The centerpiece had a structural rationale. She explained it to me for 11 minutes. Was she wrong? She was completely right, which made it harder to explain why I was smiling. He looked up at the sky. November sky, the kind that's black and total and full of more stars than you remember the city having. She told me yesterday she wants to be an architect, he said. Or a systems analyst. She hasn't decided which. She thinks they might be the same thing. She's not wrong. No, he said. She's usually not. Sophie was quiet for a moment. I talked to Marcus's mom today, before dinner. She called to say she'd met Miss Osei at a parent preview and that Miss Osei had reached out proactively to introduce herself and ask about Marcus's routine before the transition. Sophie looked at her hands. She knew about the pencil. The mom asked how she knew, and she said it was in the documentation from Marcus's current teacher. Daniel didn't say anything. He just listened. She said Marcus was going to be okay, Sophie said quietly. And I know I said that too last week. But hearing his mother say it, there was something in the way she said it that she's been carrying this fear for so long, and for just 1 minute, she put it down. You did that, Daniel said. Miss Osei did that. You built the documentation that made it possible for Miss Osei to do that. You bought the 6 pens. You spent 3 years learning one child's entire interior so completely that when the system failed, you had the whole of him written down and ready. He looked at her. That's yours. You don't get to give that away. Sophie looked at the sky for a moment. When she looked back at him, her eyes were clear and direct, and full of the particular openness that had been growing in her since a parking lot outside a restaurant 7 weeks ago. The wall down and the door wide, and the architecture finally doing what it was always supposed to do, not keeping things out, but holding the right things in. I love you, she said. Just like that. Flat and real, and no performance around it. The same way she'd said yes when he asked if she wanted to do this again. The same way she'd said we're even on the first night. Sophie Navarro had one speed when it came to the true things, and it was direct, and it was unafraid, and it was completely, entirely itself. He looked at her. I love you too, he said. I've known it for a while. I was waiting for the moment. Kevin told you not to wait for the moment. Kevin was right. He usually is, which I'll deny if you tell him. She smiled. The full one. The real one, the one that changed her whole face. And he put his arm around her on the back steps of an ordinary apartment building on a cold November night. And she leaned into it, and the city went on around them doing its city things, and Emma slept inside with Gerald keeping watch, and Marcus had 6 pens documented in a file that would follow him forward. And somewhere Lisa was beginning to understand what she had lost, and what might still be possible. And the world was not fixed, was nowhere near fixed, was complicated and expensive and demanding and full of systems that failed the people they were supposed to serve. But here, on these steps, in this cold, with this woman, it was enough, more than enough. It was the specific and ordinary and irreplaceable texture of a life being genuinely lived.
built from the wreckage of what had come before, held together not by the absence of hard things, but by the presence of people willing to stay.
Daniel Carter had spent 5 years surviving. He was done surviving. He had found someone who saw the whole of him, the architect and the father and the man who fell apart for 20 minutes and then made breakfast, and had chosen to stay anyway, not in spite of the complicated life, but because of it, because she was complicated too, because the most real things always are. Some stories don't begin with a perfect moment. Some begin with a cracked ramp and a pair of hands that reached out before the mind could decide whether to. And in that half second of pure reflex, before strategy or caution, or the careful management of expectation, something true was already in motion. That was where it started. That was where everything, eventually, was decided. Not by the tests, or the receipts, or the Friday lists, or the careful documentation of all the things worth protecting, but by a man who caught someone falling and didn't let go.